Scienceandpublicpolicy.org is Lord Monckton's excellent site. If you go there, you can print off the free PDF, ClimateGate Caught Green-Handed, Cold Facts about the hot topic of global temperature change after the ClimateGate scandal. He joins us from Copenhagen, Denmark, in extreme demand there, obviously. We're very fortunate to have him with us here today. And Lord Monckton, again, there's so many subjects to talk about. I want to get into the leaked treaty that you went and demanded and were able to get, the latest leaked information with the Danish text that has the third world figuring out they're being bamboozled and defrauded by this gaggle of scam artists. I also wanted to talk to you about your ideas for the troops out there to not get orders from headquarters, but to go to the sound of the guns, what we can do globally to expose and fight this fraud now that we're beginning to rout them. What about civil suits? You have all these scientists that were persecuted, that had their papers blocked. You have these scientific journals that were intimidated. That right there is a serious civil matter trying to destroy people's careers. Couldn't civil suits by parties defrauded or taxpayers around the world being defrauded by this lie? Isn't everyone in the world a plaintiff to sue the United Nations, to sue East Anglia, to sue the EPA, to sue Goddard Climate Center? I mean, your take on that, Lord Monckton?
Right. I think that, of course, anyone has the right to sue, but what you need to do is be very careful to use the proper procedures. And the first thing is that we're dealing here with a criminal rather than a civil matter. These people have committed crime, serious, imprisonable offences. You would call them felonies rather than misdemeanors. These are crimes for which you can go to prison and should go to prison if you commit them for a very, very long time, particularly in view of the effect that these crimes are already having on poor people around the world who are being killed in large numbers by starvation as a result of policy of Western nations, including the United States, to take, in the case of the United States, 1/3 of its agricultural land out from growing food for people who need it and into growing totally unnecessary biofuels for clunkers that don't. Result, a doubling of world food prices in the last 2 years. Result, starvation. Take Haiti, where they live on mud pies, made with real mud, costing 3 cents each, pinch of butter, pinch of salt. You take the mud, you mash it all up, lay it out in the sun to dry for 6 hours, sell it to your neighbor for 3 cents. That's what they're living on, or rather dying on, in Haiti now. And I was telling this story last year to a conference of government and opposition representatives in Madrid, and a lady in the front row burst into tears, and I said, I'm sorry to have offended you, but it is a rather terrible thing that's happening. She said, I've just come back from Haiti. Now, because of the doubling of world food prices, they can't even afford the price of a mud pie, and they're dying of starvation all over the place, she said. And she was heartbroken. She said, the reason I'm crying is that you're the first person in the Western world I've ever heard mentioning the plight of the poor. She said, I'm so grateful, I just can't tell you.
Well, sir,
that's how serious this is. These people, by their scientific fraud and the financial fraud, they're profiting enormously. One of the documents from this series of leaked documents is the complete financial account of the climate research unit, how much grants they've had, and how vastly the amount of grants have increased since they began peddling this scientific
and
fraud.
They're working with oil companies.
While people die of starvation in a dozen regions of the world, and there are food riots in those regions too, hardly ever reported in any major Western news medium. It is a scandal of the worst proportion. Our own fellow creatures are being killed by starvation because these people have lied and made up the science and hidden it so that nobody else could check.
Sir,
It doesn't get worse than that.
Going back to the question I forgot to repose at the start of the break, is this the greatest scientific fraud in history, A? And then B, we also now have in the emails where they're meeting with Dutch Royal Shell, with BP, with Siemens, and others saying, oh, they're part of our agenda. This is only part of our takeover. This is so wonderful. Can you speak to this? Is this the biggest fraud, scientific fraud in history, A? And B, the collusion of Fortune 100 companies in this scam?
Right. Let's start with that first question. It follows from my last answer that a fraud on an international scale, which has already killed millions by starvation, is the worst fraud you could ever possibly commit, because our fellow human beings are dying in large numbers because of this fraud. It doesn't get worse than that. And then we come on to your second question. Just remind me of what that was, and I'll deal with it.
The oil companies and other major corporations feverishly working with the climate scammers.
That's right. This is because they've become so frightened of the united front that the world's governing class has put up, saying we are going to peddle this climate nonsense regardless of whether it's true, that they've decided, I think cravenly, and I've told many of them so, that they'd better just give in and go along with it and try and make as much money as they can out of it. I think it's disgraceful, and I think their shareholders, there is a case for a civil suit, shareholders of companies who have done deals of this kind with the fraudsters at the UN and among the politicians and among the scientists, they do deserve to be sued by their shareholders for not protecting the best interests of shareholders, as every director of a major corporation is required by law to do. So I think that is indeed a disgrace. But what I'd like to do, if I may, is to turn to what is in this draft treaty.
Yes,
about
yes.
the amount of money that they want to take from you.
And sir, let me stop you. Let me stop you briefly. For those that don't know, and I've been searching every hour and checking during the breaks, you are the only person, and you first, several months ago, ferreted out the secret draft. Perhaps you can remind us how you were able to get that. And then...
a friend of mine called Willie Soon at the Harvard-Smithsonian Institute for Astrophysics, who reads everything, bless him, even that which is produced by the forces of darkness in this matter. And he got onto the UN, a very obscure UN website, the website of the Framework Convention on Climate Change Conference of the Parties. And he found what said it was a note by the Secretariat, but he noticed it was a much too large file just to be a note. So he looked at the file, and it was a two-page note, but attached to it was 186 pages, and that was the first draft of the Treaty of Copenhagen.
Okay, let me stop you there, because...
The title of the file did not say Treaty of Copenhagen. There was nothing to indicate what this was, and had he not been diligent in reading everything, spotting the size of the file, neither he nor anybody would ever have found it. And they would have been able to say, if we had subsequently said, oh, but we had no idea that what governments signed up to in Copenhagen meant all this, the UN would have smoothly said, oh, but it's been on our website all the time.
Okay.
That's how they play these games.
Okay.